Welcome. I really like this, my intro. Welcome, guys. Welcome, my friend. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Mind Fog podcast. I'm grateful. My heart is warm. I'm appreciative that you took some time out to get to hang out with me today on the podcast. My name is Wanu, but sometimes I do go by Amazing Soul. Welcome. Okay, so today I wanted to share a story on why driving on the highways revealed my greatest fear. So 7 years ago, I was driving on the highway. At that time in my life, I was living in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I was driving to work. And all of a sudden, my palms started becoming sweaty. My heart was beating so fast. I couldn't breathe. And while all that was happening, I had to literally park on the side of the highway to just like take deep intentional breaths just to um, allow my body or my nervous system to kind of have some semblance of safety. So I took some deep intentional breath, but I didn't understand what was happening in my body then. And it was a bit confusing because prior to that time, I used to drive on the highway. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and I did start driving a little bit late, in air quotes. I started driving probably, so I'm the first child of four children. I have three sisters, and my immediate two younger sisters actually started driving before me. That's when I knew I started driving late. Um, I started driving probably when I was like, after I was done with college. Yeah, I remember. That's when I actually got my driver's license. That was probably 20 or 19 or 21. So for anyone out there who feels like, they started, not to worry, I know the only one who started driving late. I'm 34 now. So on an average, it feels like I started driving late, but there's really no late or early. I just started driving when I was meant to drive. That to say was the reason why I brought that up was because as I keep sharing this story, it started to reveal to me why subconsciously I started driving really late in my life. So fast forward to the first panic attack that I had on my way to work about 8 years ago in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I didn't understand what was going on, and I just couldn't figure out why my body reacted that way. Now, later on, probably 2 years after that, at that time I was in the military, so I was stationed to my first duty station, well, first and last, for Bragg, now for Liberty. And I remember this so vividly. So I was on the highway again in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I had another panic attack. The same thing that happened to me in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, happened to me in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Just different states, same reaction. I was sweaty, my heart was beating really fast, and I had to, park actually, park at the edge of the highway. I think I drove off the highway and I just parked in like a regular street, and I just, started to breathe, and I didn't know what triggered this. I didn't even understand what was going on. After that happened, um, I realized the fear was so overwhelming that I started to do something my logical brain started to do something to protect myself. You see, our brains are wired to protect us. It's not good or bad, it's just what the primary function is. And if something traumatic happens to us in our formative years, the subconscious mind buries that memory so deep in our minds that we won't be able to remember what happened to us. It's not right or wrong, it's just the mind or the body's intelligent way of protecting us. Because the nervous system is like a container. If the container is small, in quote, or is not regulated enough, it's not able to process overwhelming emotions like fear of driving on the highways. And that's what happened to me. At that point in my life, my nervous system wasn't regulated enough, or would you say I had a small container. So when that fear triggered in my body, my brain or my nervous system or my whole system couldn't process that emotion. Hence the reason why my heart was beating so fast. My hands, my palms were sweaty, and just thinking about the highways was so overwhelming to my brain. Like I was shut down. Like I couldn't think about it. So once the second panic attack happened, there's this driving app. I'm very sure maybe you've heard about it before, called Waze. So what I said to do was I changed my default settings on my Waze app to not to lead me to the highway anymore, but to use the back roads. That's how much um, I was so scared of highways then. I had so much fear of highways. So every time I was driving to work and it required me to go to the highway, or I had to drive somewhere, my Waze was my Waze, I program my Waze in such a way, I put it to certain settings that it should bypass highways and just take the back roads. Yes, it's longer, but for me it was so that those panic attacks don't come back to back. And yes, it was also like a protection mechanism at that time, because I didn't even know where this was coming from, right? Now I did that for years. Now fast forward to 2022, when I was medically retired from the military, I started to get very curious about nervous system regulation, subconscious patterns, trauma. Why do we react to certain situations? At least in my life, I just wanted to understand why, I reacted to certain situations. In particular, my enormous fear for highways. I just didn't understand it. And I was just so curious to get to the root cause of why I was so scared of driving on the highway. So what did I do? As I kept reading books and, consciously ensuring that, I asked myself every day, how can I feel safe in my body today? Also consciously disrupting my patterns. So for me, I realized that there was an old script playing in my brain. So in order for me to consciously get out of that script, I started to tweak my daily routines, like brush my teeth with my non-dominant hand, take a shower in the dark. I take different routes to the grocery store, and just doing that daily. Or if I go to Starbucks, I don't really drink coffee that much, but anytime I do go to Starbucks, I offer like a different type of coffee, just to register to my brain that it is safe. It is safe. It is safe to embrace new experiences. But I knew that I had to create some sort of safety in my body first. I knew that my container, my nervous system wasn't regulated enough. I started to understand, oh, that's why I was triggered so much when this happened. So I started to also understand that anything that happened during our formative years, which is 0 to 7, becomes the baseline of our adult experience. Now, remember how I said that, our subconscious mind will, put a memory so deep in our minds that we won't be able to remember it, not to hurt us, but just protect us because we cannot safely We don't have a regulated nervous system, and we don't have a big enough container to process that emotion. And that's exactly what happened to me. I started to remember what happened, why that trigger came up the first time in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg. When I was 6 months old, I think I've told this story before, but not in relation to the fear of highways. When I was 6 months old, my mother and myself were in a car on a Sunday, and she was driving, and we had an accident. The car tumbled into a ditch. It somersaulted, and I was 6 months old. And that was my first experience of being in a car and having that accident, right? And I feel like my brain interpreted that experience. That was my first time of being aware of the fear of being on the road, driving. And ever since then, it wasn't until maybe 2022 or 2023 when I started to remember things that I was like, holy shit, that's the reason why I was so scared of highways. So what happened to me at 6 months old? Um, the reason why I couldn't remember it, because most of my life it was fight or flight, it was survival, it was chaotic. There was no conscious awareness there. Awareness wasn't kicked in. It was just go, go, go. It was like a mouse on a hamster wheel. It wasn't until after the military and I really started to slow down and just started to pay attention to myself, who am I beside all these labels, and why do I get triggered by just little things? And at some point I felt so really bad, like everyone driving on the highway is not a big deal. Why do I react that way? But I realized that that story wasn't going to help me in any way, and just approaching myself with more compassion and kindness, like, hey, want to know it's okay, you didn't know what you don't know. And now just understanding the origin story of why the fear emanated into that panic attack really made me give myself so much compassion and kindness. And I'm like, it's okay. I was a 6 month old baby who had an accident, and my brain took that as fear of highways. And that's okay. And, once I started to, get a big enough container to, regulate my own emotions, I, started not to change the story, but to show that part of me some compassion, that it's okay. Send so much love to that version of myself, tell her she's safe, just love. I think that's the biggest that's the most transformative thing we can do for ourselves on this journey, just showing ourselves love. If nothing else makes sense, love always love always makes sense. And I always come back to some love and kindness and compassion to myself, because initially it started with, why the fuck am I scared of a fucking highway? And I was hard on myself. Then once I started to understand what really happened, not judging it, not saying it shouldn't have happened that way, just like, oh, just seeing what happened is like, oh, it started to make sense. Now for me, once I started to have like a big enough container, remember I'm still using the back roads. I did that for like 2 3 years. I'm still using the back roads to get to wherever I'm going. So it was like baby step approach, not overwhelming myself. So once I did that for a while, also like tweaking my habits, started to interrupt my loops. I said there was some semblance of safety happening. So I started to do maybe what you call exposure therapy. So I live in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I had like a business mastermind where I had to drive to Raleigh, North Carolina every week for like 8 months. So I took that as a challenge. At that point, there was some semblance of safety. I took that as a challenge to face my biggest fear. So at that point, I knew that there wasn't going to be panic attacks, but I knew that there was going to be some sign of resistance. And I also knew that the only way is through. And I knew that my system could take on that experience. So I took that as a challenge, and I adjusted my settings from back roads to highways. Like, we're doing the big, put on my big girl pants. So every week I faced my fear. I would drive on the highway to Raleigh, and for 1 hour, so 2 hours, like 1 hour to go and 1 hour back. When I first started doing this, I was terrified, but I knew it was the fear. But and I always give myself so much compassion. Every time I merged, like I merged in another highway, I would look at myself in the rearview mirror and I would give myself a high five. Like, I was always like giving myself so much compassion, just like telling myself it's okay. And the more I kept doing, I remember I did this for 8 months nonstop, consistently. And maybe at like month 3 or month 4, no fear. It was like the highways was not overwhelming anymore. I could drive with ease. Also, I realized because of that accident, I also had fear of driving in new places, where, if I find myself in a new city, I didn't want to drive. My brain just felt overwhelming, and it was because of that accident. But the more I kept approaching this fear, driving on the highway every week, at some point, it dissipated. It felt normal. It felt like I was driving on a regular street. And I was like, holy shit. Oh my gosh. This shit works. The reason why that was even remotely possible was because I had a safe enough container to process those emotions, to tell myself it was okay. Just micro moments of safety. How do I create safety today in my body? And just kind of go from there. I like to call it baby steps, like just little drops every day. And I don't have panic attacks anymore. I can drive in new cities now. Oh, I also had the fear of, if it wasn't my car, I couldn't drive in a new car because my brain was so used to safety and just to keep me safe. But as I kept doing those exposure therapies and being kind and compassionate to myself, I literally can be in any car and adjust my mirrors, of course, and I can drive anywhere, anytime. And it's so crazy because now made me understand that the brain is just doing its best to protect us, but the body always keeps score of things that happen to us. Remember, this happened to me when I was 6 months old. I was just a tiny baby, but my body kept the score and it came up as a panic attack decades later. Like, that is just wow. That it just really made me understand that if we do not start to get curious about, why we react the way we react to certain things, those patterns will just keep coming up. It's not right or wrong, it's just how our nervous system is wired. And until that container becomes big enough to process those emotions, the same patterns will happen, the same situations will happen. It might be different. Remember my story, right? The same thing that happened in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, happened in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Different states, same situation. So it's like, oh my God, you can't ultimately, the only way through that is really starting to pay attention to why, get curious with compassion, with openness, with love, and realize it's okay. It's probably maybe something happened when you were a kid, and just getting curious about what that was, not with this was wrong, I need to fix it. No, with okay, I'm just curious, what's the story here? Not right or wrong, just being aware of what the story is and just kind of go from there. So yeah, that is my story. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. And this is me. This is me reminding you, my friend, whatever fear it is that you have in your life right now, give yourself some compassion and grace along the way, and also realize that if you if you do not know exactly why you keep reacting to the same things, there is a high probability that something happened to you an experience happened to you when you were a kid, you probably should get curious to that moment. That might lead you to give you a better picture of what it is that is really going on under the hood. But also remember, some compassion and kindness goes a really, really long way. Because for me, I had to always show up with some compassion and kindness and tell myself I didn't know what I did not know, and that's okay. And that just gave me permission to just like, it's okay, Wanu. It's so we can try again tomorrow. It's okay. And just I'm really grateful that, I don't have that fear anymore. And this is just a reminder to you. Hopefully my story can inspire you that, take some baby steps. You don't have to overwhelm yourself all at once, because your nervous system won't be able to take it. But just take some baby steps to guide you to better understand yourself, better understand your patterns, and just maybe out of curiosity and openness, it just might lead you to the root cause of why you react the way you react. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. And this is your daily reminder. If it gets dark, if it gets confusing, come back to some compassion and kindness for yourself.